All right, I believe we're ready to roll.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Riverside City Council work session for Thursday, January 12th, 2023. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. If you would all please rise and pledge to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Denning.
Here.
Mrs. Franklin. Here. Ms. Fry. Here. Mr. Joseph.
Yes.
Ms. Lomach.
Here.
Mr. Maxfield.
Present.
Mayor Williams.
Here. All present and accounted for. No need to excuse any absent members. Mr. Manager, any additions or corrections to the agenda as presented?
No, Mr. Mayor. Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion for Mr. Denning and a second for Mr. Maxfield to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Agenda is approved, and we will move right into the work session items. Mr. Manager, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first item that I had teed up for council this evening had to do with the proclamation policy and then by extension, the council's policy handbook and manual. Just a couple things to kind of frame that conversation. The purpose of putting it on the agenda today is really to give you all a space to have a conversation. The practice of cities adopting proclamations or mayors adopting proclamations is pretty common. It's typically more of an executive function in the same way that the governor or the president may issue a proclamation. But this came up recently because one of the things we learned last year is that we would benefit from just having, as a staff, and particularly the clerk, from having a little bit more structure around the process. That way we're not having proclamations come in kind of at the last minute. We can make sure folks are here to accept those proclamations, and basically design a process that's a little bit smoother for folks on our end as well. But I also know that folks may have some thoughts or concerns or want to weigh in on, what are the purpose of the proclamations are and the role that council may want to have in trying to weigh in on the proclamation process or specific proclamations that may come forward. And so again, just wanted to make a space for you all to have that conversation. This is a pure policy issue in the sense that there are no right answers. It really is it's a matter that's up to the council and your comfort levels about how this process works, what you want a proclamation to symbolize, signify, and how you want the process to unfold going forward. So I am happy to answer any questions or provide insights that I can. I know the clerk is also happy to weigh in on the process and sort of her day today about how she experiences that. But outside of that, happy to turn it over to Mayor or anybody else on council who wants to weigh in on this item.
I will jump in.
Yes, Brenda.
So we did have a discussion earlier in 22 about just like the process of getting a proclamation through. And from my recollection is that pretty much that was not contentious at all. I did ask to have a follow-up conversation because the way it's worded is it's the council that is making this proclamation as opposed to just the mayor. And if that is true, if it is coming from the entire council, there is no part of the process where the council agrees, yes, we want to have this proclamation. So I see it as having the appropriateness of the proclamation would be that what we say, that it matches who's saying it, So if it is a mayoral decision as to whether we issue this proclamation, then perhaps the process should reflect that it's coming from the mayor. If it's coming from the council, then we should probably have some sort of checkpoint for everyone to say, yeah, we agree with this.
Or at least the majority.
Or something, yeah. Mhm.
I agree. So I'm kind of like 100% in line with how you're thinking, because I mean, you got to think of the form of government that Riverside is. It's a city manager form of government. So it's not a weak mayor, strong mayor. So the mayor is more of a ceremonial position. And these are the types of things that I see often in this type of government, that the mayor would have the right to do those, like hand someone the keys to the city, declare today Brenda Fry Day, right? Maybe a good idea.
Yeah. We know.
But
Day in Riverside.
But,
Brenda
and,
Fry.
and I agree with you. Putting our name on something, while it's never been an issue, we don't live in a world of like, oh, let's let something happen. We get, yeah, I trust that you never do this, but we don't know who the next 5 mayors are going to be, and they want to support something that the sky is pink day in Riverside. That's not true. We don't want to agree on that.
You're at this
So-
flat day.
So,
It is at night sometimes when the sun's.
okay. But I think it kind of leaves that to being accurate. It's not us who's signed off on these,
Mhm.
it's the mayor who's the one writing it, declaring it. And then I think if we kind of leave, if we have an issue or we want to bring something to people's attention and say, hey, could you proclamate this?
Mhm.
And then if the mayor, for whatever reason, doesn't want to do that, then we could bring it to a voice of council via a resolution, and make a stance. If we want to, if something happened and we want to come in solace and all 7 of us say like, we want to recognize this issue, then we can, and that would come from all of us via a voice vote. That's kind of my thought on it.
I look at it this way. I think proclamations are good. I think for me, I don't know that it has to be as formal as a vote of a resolution to get a proclamation across the table. But what I would like to see is, first of all, this kind of came up, a couple of us had a discussion at NLC about it. And as far as I understood, anyone can make a proclamation. The mayor just delivers it.
Mhm.
And so if that is, if that's a policy we want, then maybe that needs to be reflected, that any council member can bring it up. The only thing that I would ask is if a proclamation is being made, at least a heads up email like, hey, there's going to be a proclamation. This is who I'm, doing. If you feel an issue with it, then maybe we bring it to discussion in council. But if there's no issue, because for the most part, I think over at least the last 3 years I've been here, there's nothing that we have recognized that I thought was a bad thing. I may not know the person personally or, who made the proclamation, but I don't know that we have to have in-depth. I think we just need to have clarification, because it would be nice to at least have that information that, hey, I'm thinking of recognizing this person and this is why I'm doing it. And I think that can just, if anything happened through email, and then if some people in council find an issue with it, then we bring it up in a meeting where like, hey, I don't want to see this proclamation or for whatever reason or something like that. But I would just like it where all council understands that anyone can bring a proclamation. I also believe that if you want to do a proclamation, that it's not the clerk's responsibility to gather your information. If you want one, you gather the information, you submit it to the clerk. The clerk can do her edit or whatever, to make everything flow. But I don't know that, I do believe that. Yeah,
She
but-
doesn't need to do the research.
Yeah, I do
She-
believe if
shouldn't be
it's
an
something that's
expectation.
important to
Yeah.
you, it wouldn't take you, but an hour of your time to, do your research and at least bring the information for it. So that's where I kind of sit on the whole thing. I would just like some notification that, hey, I'd like to bring this forward.
Right, that's kind of where I was thinking. It would kind of filter up through the mayor saying, I want to do this proclamation,
Or it's been requested.
or it's been like any of us can. And for 99% of what we're going to ask the mayor, I don't think it's going to be an issue. However, if we're setting this as a policy, this is going to supersede any of the 7 of us being on this board. And then go on YouTube, look at any type of like contentious issue that someone wanted to support and that not all council got behind and the rafters get full. and it becomes a mess. I think what the purpose of this conversation is to not have that mess happen or have a process that it doesn't get as sloppy for future councils.
Well, but a policy is part of your operating, our operating. Every year you can change it if you want. It doesn't, it's not set in law that if we make this policy, that just goes in our handbook. Because it's our operating procedures. And if a new council comes on, new people come on, they can change that of however they want it.
Where I want to jump in and something that I think is very important that I would like to do, and it is at the urging and suggestion of the clerk, is that there's a timeline that is adhered to mostly by me, because I think I've probably put the clerk in a pinch more than once in the last couple of years when I wanted so-and-so wanted to have Small Business Week recognized, and I would tell Katie like a week before, and she's trying to, and as Sarah pointed out, the clerk wants to do a good job and doesn't want the proclamations to look subpar, and they never do. And I, without realizing how the timing of a lot of this stuff works with our agendas and putting these things together, thinking, oh, what's the big deal? We're gonna, everybody wants Small Business Week recognized, just throw that on there. But we, myself included, especially, need, I think, to have in writing and in practice a 30-day window or something like that, where the clerk knows, okay, in March, so-and-so council member wants to recognize this, and everybody seems okay with it. So I need the language from Brenda, and we will have the text ready. And then so-and-so has invited the person from this organization, and they plan to be at the March 4th meeting. And we know that with plenty of time, as opposed to you guys getting an agenda and seeing it on there for the first time, which is not what I want to have happen.
Mhm.
I want that to be something that you guys know well in advance, whether you've requested it or I would like to recognize Small Business Week or whatever it might be. And I know from the clerk's standpoint, we need that. I want to make it easier for her to take care of all the other things, because she has much more important things to do than those items. And I don't want to make it rushed because I've asked her with less than a week turnaround. I think that establishing a turnaround time, just like for BZA, if you want to be on the February BZA, well, then you have to have your paperwork in by the middle of January. And I think from that standpoint, everybody has time to digest that and ask questions. And if something needs to either answer questions answered ahead of time, is it something that all council is happy to and comfortable putting their name on, or is it something we maybe need a little more discussion on? Then it's not happening that Thursday.
Right.
And Sarah, I'm happy to hear, or Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to hear your comments. And then I also would like to hear the clerk talk more about the procedural side, so we all understand that part.
Well, I was gonna support what you said, but I was also gonna suggest that we give her some airtime. But I do think that it's important that we consider that we don't talk about personality people in public meetings. Now, organizations or whatever, but you could hurt a lot of feelings. You could really stir up some, if you were discussing giving or not giving to an individual in a public meeting. Organizations or whatever, but I think we can handle it with the emails or whatever. I think the whole gist of the conversation is just us knowing ahead of time.
Knowing
Yeah,
ahead of time.
certainly.
It's not, and that hasn't been happening.
And I would,
But I don't think we should be having discussions about people and individuals, whether or not you're gonna recognize them, when we could do that.
I also want to be abundantly clear that we can't have discussion or deliberation on anything, proclamation or not, over email.
I think questions answered is a better way to say that.
We can't
There
deliberate.
is general information and there is discussion. And so if someone submits a thing to the clerk, all the clerk has to do is send out and say, I've received a proclamation for X person. And like I said, if there's an issue, when you come into the next meeting, you can have that conversation.
Correct.
But as for that, people think that we can't talk, we can talk. You just can't,
Yeah.
you can't make votes and you can't make decisions in these large groups without being in public. But
Four of us can't.
informational is allowed.
4 of us can't deliberate on city issue without it being an open meeting.
We know
Correct.
that.
Right.
We know
understand.
that.
Just,
We've been here a long time.
I know,
We
I'm just
understand
being-
the rules.
there was a little bit of gray area in this that I was a little bit concerned. about.
Informational and conversation are two different things.
All right, Madam Clerk, on the procedural side of making it easier for you to process these and timelines, I think that you had mentioned to me that there's best practices out there that you lean on, and we'd love to hear more about that.
Right, that's what I had come up with a couple months back. I did research on other cities, municipalities, and kind of what they do. And maybe some other communities in this council previously. There were a lot of proclamations done on a regular basis. And it was hard because at that time, it was also a lot of, I had to do the research. And so that was difficult. Mine is more consideration of if you want it included in the packet. Well, that packet goes a week before, and I kind of needed a week before that. So right there's a 2 weeks. But what has happened with this council is that like it'll come up at a council meeting for the next council meeting. And that's almost not enough time. But to Pete's literally written every one. The mayor has written every one. He is like, I would really like to do this small business, whatever. So, and Pete's written them and I've just had to format. And so that wasn't much of a problem, but it's still that if it's anything before 2 weeks, it's almost like not even going to be in that packet. It's just going to be a placeholder and you're not going to get to see the verbiage. So I had, once after doing the research, I kind of just put this together, something I didn't think that was too contentious, 30 days. We wouldn't have more than 3 proclamations in a meeting just for time. Probably the only other thing is that I had, and it seemed to be consistent with other cities, where the proclamations should promote the community values, goals, strategic plan, and operating principles of the city of Riverside. So, I mean, obviously, definitely like bring to the forefront people that have definitely made this community better. Special observances, especially Suicide Prevention Month. I really like that we did that. We did some in the past. I don't know that it necessarily, diaper awareness. I don't know that that did anything. So, but it was one that was done. So I guess, I mean, I've not had an issue with any of them that have come up. Mine is more of a time and procedure and process that I need.
Katie, I like that. It's a 30-day in advance kind of notification fitting with values of the city. And but sometimes there might be something that comes up within that 30-day window. That's within, ahead of that, or after that 30-day window. Is there something that we could write in at the mayor discretion or council discretion or something
I
that?
would just say this isn't really like a law. I would just say try to be as conscientious of it as possible.
Yeah,
I would
but
really say that if it's definitely.
if
when
it's not
that has
followed
happened,
or if it's not
usually
in
been
there.
for a person. I can remember a particular student that, doing one for students particularly is the ones I remember that it's like, hey, it's in the school year crunch time, or someone had done something, or in the matter of certain medical situations, we've done that. And that's an exception, not the norm. I guess that's what.
Hey, can I ask this proclamations have to solely be at the city council meeting? Can you take one to if there's
Yes.
something to celebrate, can you take that proclamation to wherever that event is or something
Yep,
like
you
that
don't
as
have to
well?
do them here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can we have something like that then just added to our handbook?
Yeah, you guys can
Yeah,
do
I mean-
whatever you want.
Well, can I clarify some points? So if we are going to continue with the proclamation being from the city, that when it's requested, then immediate notification goes to all of council, and that there is some guidance for when a council member perhaps disagrees. So would that guidance be that we do discuss it in an open meeting or not discuss it in an
You
open
would.
meeting?
At the next meeting, either during your comment section or whatever, you could bring that, or when we do an amendment of the agenda, you could say, hey, I would like to have this added to the agenda. I mean, I would think that would be in your ability. Am I correct?
Well, I think if if I propose to recognize something and it goes out to everybody, maybe the procedure is I tell the clerk I want to recognize such and such at next month's meeting, and the clerk notifies everybody else. And then Brenda reads it and says, well, I'm really not sure about that. And then maybe you and I speak.
Okay.
And you either questions are answered,
Oh, yeah.
or if at the end of, again, I'm just speculating, or in this scenario, under that, at the end of that conversation, maybe you have had your questions answered. Are you still, maybe you feel even more so about, and I was not quite sure. Now I'm even more not quite sure. Maybe then it becomes a question of, does it stay on the agenda? Then it would have to, then I think it would come to a meeting that we could easily discuss. And at that point, with the 30-day window, it wouldn't be something we're not pulling it from, we didn't invite somebody and say, now leave because we're tearing the proclamation in front of you.
My fear is though, if for some reason we don't stick to that 30-day window, somebody slides that in, you don't have enough time to talk about it. You don't have enough time to have that discussion. And then it's on either because you have to notify, if it's going to be a person or organization, you got to know, you would want them there. If you don't do it within that 30-day window, then someone could just slide something in too. I mean, you can look at devil's advocate of that.
Well,
I know
yeah.
that we just say, well, it's best practice at 30 days, but then someone at some point don't follow that best practice and puts it in. Who makes that decision to say yes or no, or no, we're not going to put that on. It's not fit within that 30-day window or whatever, or there might be some contentious.
So
Well, here's a, when we appoint someone to get a letter of appointment, we just make a motion to bring, what we used to do is make a motion to bring forward.
A resolution.
Well, we used to bring, what would we say? We bring forth,
motion to appoint.
yeah,
Sure.
but we could do the same thing with the proclamation is, hey, we're planning on putting the proclamation for Cancer Awareness Month on at next month's meeting. And then so we just make a motion to bring it forward and then we all vote and then we're done. And then if you, then that way. And for like in Pete's case, where Brenda had an issue, but if nobody else had, now you've got the vote and
You can
you're
proceed.
done.
So
But if there's 3 other people besides Brenda that have an issue, then we have to have a discussion, then we have a discussion,
well,
or then we
Part-
don't do it. I mean,
part of
it's
what I
that
think
simple.
some of these proclamations that have happened since I've been here, in the 1 year prior, is it's a surprise to some people. And we don't want to maybe talk about it 2 weeks ahead of time. And we're gonna bring them here and they don't know
Well,
why they're coming.
You could still do things like you've seen that there's a proclamation on the agenda for next
I mean,
month.
it could be for the same meeting.
And
that
then
we-
you could just vote yes or no, because we've all seen it.
So here's kind of real
Sorry.
quick.
Go ahead.
Can I just jump in to synthesize some things real quick, just from what I'm hearing? I'm kind of hearing 2 tacks, and I think the conversation started down a path where there's sort of 2 things. So I understand that there's kind of there's a desire to create some sort of a feedback loop where at least council is informed about what the proclamations are going to be. The sensitivity that I'm kind of running into at the moment is that I think we also want to be careful that we're not creating a precedent or almost too much process over a proclamation. And because that really, I mean, if you get 3 in a meeting, that's going to bog down just the process of getting for what is a fairly straightforward, legislative procedure. The other way that I tend to look at this, and just in the various places that I've been, is that you can almost think about a proclamation as sort of the executive branch's way of having discretion to do some recognition. And if the council as a legislative body wants to do recognition or make a statement or do anything like that, you all could adopt a resolution to that effect as well. So the other thing I kind of run into is that I think if we build too much process around proclamations, it's almost like you could just do a resolution instead of, we're almost doing the same thing. You know what I mean? So you know, in as much as, I think one of the way the conversation first started, what made the most sense to me, for whatever it's worth, is that, sort of the easy button approach here would be, we could take the city council reference out of the actual proclamation language. And of course, it's reflective to a certain degree of the city and of the council, but it sort of makes the proclamation more firmly a mayoral prerogative, that whoever the mayor is would get to exercise that discretion and then live with the consequences if they make a bad political decision or a good political decision or whatever. It would be a mayoral function. And then if the council wants to weigh in on another matter, they could do that. Any future council could do that as part of a resolution. It just builds a cleaner cut into the process of it.
If of us want a proclamation, we just say, hey, Pete,
Right. That's what I said.
would support that.
That is a more elegant way of what I was saying 25 minutes ago.
Well, and I think, you know, and again, I don't want to preempt if there's more discussion to be had. I don't want to preempt that, but I think that this conversation, I think, is just helpful for me and hopefully for the clerk, just as staff, because it really, at the end of the day, I think the initial thought that the clerk had pulled together about identifying a process, really, it doesn't sound like there's much that you all think needs to change there, as much as just keeping those lines of communication alive to know what's going on. And that's the only other thing I might add, is just that you are all perfectly within your rights. And I think it's important for you all to have individual conversations, you know, about your thoughts and opinions. Now, you can't have a serial meeting, you can't take votes, you can't do the work beforehand, but as far as just getting to know each other and what your opinions are and generally how you think about things, we need that today. I mean, more people, you know, just make assumptions and roll on, and that inhibits a conversation if we don't do that work. So at any rate, if that sounds reasonable to you all, then I think I can work with the clerk to maybe if we need to make a minor adjustment to that, just to reflect this sentiment, and then we could just change the actual language of the proclamation itself to pull out that reference, and that would be a way of just making that clean cut. Okay.
The one thing I would want to add to Brenda's point is that when I became mayor, one of the things, when April and I came on council, one of the things that I really wanted to change was, or I wanted to avoid, I should say, was something that was brought up for the first time the same night you guys were asked to take action. And I really did, and I do believe that there should be an opportunity for us as a legislative body to have some deliberation time to go through things and ask questions, and not like, all right, what do you think? What do you think? Vote yes, no, yes, no. And because of that, I certainly understand that you, as my fellow council members, should not find out about something like this the moment you look at your agenda for the upcoming meeting, which is in a few days. It's already on there. So that's something that I want to improve upon. And that's why I'm excited for the suggestions that the clerk has to build out that process, that the lines of communication, as Josh said, are there. And, you know, my phone's always on.
Well, we will go ahead and take another look at this and make any other minor adjustments that need to happen. And then we'll get this scheduled for one of the meetings in February. And we'll incorporate it into the council policy manual and then put that in front of you to adopt that revision as a housekeeping measure from there. So, cool. Thank you. Next on the agenda, I'm actually going to switch directions entirely. And we have Mr. Lohr with us this evening, who has a presentation and an update on electric and gas aggregation and the process there. And I'll go ahead and give I think that'll stretch all the way. Oh, actually, Chris, I got to share the screen. Sorry. Yeah, that's
Let's make
no.
sure. Let's make
Step
sure
one,
that,
how to run the Zoom meeting. Okay.
Service.
And then I'll put this to the side and minimize that. There you go. All your, yep. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Good evening. I am going to give you an update on utility aggregation. So let me start with the first slide here. So just as a bit of a refresher, in order to get an opt-out aggregation program started in the city, there had to be an issue on the ballot placed on both for electric and natural gas. The community approved both of those ballot measures in November. So that means that all residential customers in the city and small non-residential customers, smaller businesses, smaller industries, will be automatically enrolled in whatever aggregation program we set up unless they choose to opt out of the program. One other thing that I'll remind everybody of, there's some the question I always get is who am I going to get my bill from then if we go with a different supplier? Well, the bill is still going to come from AES, who we get our electric bill from, and help me out with the other one because they changed the name from
Centerpoint.
Vector and Centerpoint. Thank you. For natural gas. However, the actual supply of electricity or natural gas could come potentially from a different company. And that's where hopefully we would be able to get some favorable rates through the aggregation program. So now that we're ready to start that, the next step is we have to pick our aggregator. And we have a couple of options. So the best options that we have before us are SOPAC, which I wrote it up there this time. So because I can never remember what the acronym stands for. Sustainable Ohio Public Energy Council. And the second option is through the Miami Valley Communications Council, which has a partnership with the Ohio Municipal League and Palmer Energy, who would serve as the aggregator. Okay, so I'm going to start with SOPAC and give you an idea of what that entails there. So SOPAC is a council of governments. So it's all governmental entities. It's all subject to public record laws. All the member communities form a general assembly, and a number of those communities serve on the board of directors. So at present, we would be the second largest jurisdiction in SOPAC. So the top 5 largest jurisdictions are guaranteed a seat on the board of directors. So in SOPAC, Riverside's representative would serve on that board of directors if we were to join. Big focus of SOPAC, as their name implies, is they focus on renewable energy. Okay, so right now, all of the energy provided to the SOPAC members is green energy, renewable energy. As I understand it, City of Dayton's energy is actually hydroelectric. And one of the things, as I spoke to them a couple of times this week, one of the things they wanted me to make sure to point out is while it is green energy, they have baked into their programs where if that's not what you want, you can go ahead and opt out of that and get what they call brown energy. So if you want more traditional energy that you want to use it that way, that's great. You can get that. That might be coal generated or natural gas generated. So that is an option. Another feature of SOPAC is that they have a community grants program. So the communities can voluntarily participate. You don't have to, even if you're a SOPAC member, but if you do, then you can use those funds for sustainability projects. So some of those projects that other communities have done is energy efficiency updates for government facilities, solar panels on government facilities, electric vehicles for a smaller police department, as well as charging stations. One of the ideas that I discussed with the city manager earlier this week was energy efficiency updates for single family homes in the community. We have a number of neighborhoods that I think have older housing stock. And perhaps some of those residents are less able to update their homes than in other neighborhoods. That might be an opportunity for us to be able to allow them to update with insulation or windows and make it so that living in their house is a little bit more affordable. The pool size for SOPEC, and I think that's one of beyond a surcharge or a fee that you're paying the aggregator. I think the pool size is probably another thing that's very important in getting a good favorable rate. The pool size that they have right now for electric is 600 gigawatt hours of electric. So that's the total size of the electricity required for the pool. The gas program is something they just started recently, so that's still forming. If all the communities participate, it would be a similarly sized pool, but they just don't know at this point what that's going to be. Some of the jurisdictions that are involved in SOPEC right now, City of Dayton is the largest and probably most recent, and Athens, the City of Athens, Athens County, Gallipolis, and there's another one below.
Logan.
Thank you, Logan. And then a number of other villages. And from what I'm told, they're talking to a number of different jurisdictions in the state around. I know they're talking to most jurisdictions here in the Dayton area, as well as others in Columbus. Okay. So with SOPEC, the process and timeline, and I want to emphasize that this is there are some variables here, both for the SOPEC timeline and with the MVCC timeline, where it's not 100% guaranteed, but I've gotten you as firm of information as I can. So and you'll see for these first two steps, these are the same for SOPEC and for the Communications Council, is we're required to hold public hearings on the plan of operation and governance as required by the ORC. So we'd have to have two public hearings on this. In the case of SOPEC, we would be adopting their plan of governance of operations and governance. With MVCC, they're creating a new one that we would be adopting. So we could hold the public hearings in February for both. And then we would have to adopt legislation in February or March. In speaking with SOPEC earlier this week, if the council would opt to go with them and they were to pass the legislation in February, then it's possible that residents would be able to start getting a new electric rate as early as April or May. And that is because they have a contract with AEP Energy. And so they made me aware earlier that they're going to be the exclusive provider for AEP Energy. And so they would not have to put out an RFP or anything like that. They would just go directly to them and say, what's the best you can give us for this number of customers. So that's certainly a positive that we could lock in a rate and start receiving that possibly for residents in April or May. For the gas aggregation, like I said, that for SOPEC is still in the works. So we would be looking at going through the process. We would pass the legislation and do the public hearings in February. But they would have to go through an RFP process. And after talking to all the communities and gathering that up, then notify the residents after they lock in a rate, give them the opportunity to opt out, and then we might be looking at more like the end of July or later for that to happen for the gas aggregation. I'm throwing a lot at you. I know it. Any questions before I move on? Through the Miami Valley Communications Council. So the way that they're structuring this is that and the Miami Valley Communications Council is another council of governments with a number of members throughout the area. We are associate members. So we don't have voting rights for the organization as a whole, but we do participate in a number of different functions. So the way that this would work with aggregation is they would set up an aggregation subcommittee. Everybody who participates would have a seat on that committee. So we would be there. From that group, there would be elected executive directors, a group of 5, and they would be the decision-making body for a number of the aggregation whatever considerations. So that not to make things too complicated. So that, as I understand it, that group would then have a representative on the OML, Ohio Municipal League Committee. And that committee at OML would manage the relationship with Palmer Energy. Okay. So in terms of the influence that we have on that process, it's a little bit more indirect than what we would have with SOPEC. And both the electric and the natural gas groups are now forming with MVCC. So they're gathering up participants. And as far as I know, no council in the area has passed legislation to participate in that yet. So some of this is still up in the air, but their estimates, Palmer Energy estimates that of all 17 jurisdictions that are interested to participate, then it would be a larger group of 860 gigawatts. So that's a little bit, if we all participate, then it would be larger than the current pool that SOPEC has for electric. With the gas group, it's potentially up to 4.2 billion cubic feet per year. There's really not a comparison for that group size to what's in SOPEC. Since theirs hasn't formed, we don't know what their group size might be. So there's unfortunately not a direct comparison. So, and like I mentioned, I don't think any council has voted to join this group just yet, because they just put out some of their draft legislation recently and the draft plan of operation and governance.
So you just told us about the 2 groups that we could be providers for or generators for us. Is that correct? Is that the way I'm understanding this? So the first one you gave us is a generate that we could use, or this one?
Broker.
Broker. I'm sorry.
That's a
Broker. I'm
good
sorry.
term to
Thank you.
describe it. Yeah. Mhm.
So my question though is for the second one, I mean, can we even pass legislation or even begin to move forward with this if we wanted to?
We can, yes. So the way it would work is council would pass a resolution to participate in the MVCC aggregation program. And through that, they contract with Palmer Energy, who would actually be the broker. So that's how it works.
Okay.
But if for some reason all 17 jurisdictions are
Mhm.
not interested, could potentially backfire because we would have a smaller pool compared to SOPEC, correct?
That is a potential.
Yeah.
But SOPAC is already smaller by 260.
Well,
Not necessarily.
not
That's only if
necessarily.
all 17 jurisdictions
Well, that's what
participate.
I'm saying.
Mhm.
What I'm saying is there's area for some to leave because you still are.
But-
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of
Very small
unknowns
margin.
right now
That's what
within.
I'm saying. This is a very unknown one.
It really is, yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's all I wanted to clarify, that
Okay.
this one is, right now, it is not as stable as the first one you presented us.
Do we have
Is this newly forming type?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
information if SOPEC is getting new members other than us?
They were not able or willing to confirm any new members. I know they recently spoke to Clayton. Clayton City Council heard from SOPAC last Thursday. And then I believe next week they are talking to Palmer Energy. So I know it's under consideration there. I
Wait.
believe,
SOPEC is talking to Palmer Energy?
I'm sorry. When I
Clayton
said
is.
they, I meant Clayton.
Clayton.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah. So Clayton is still considering both options.
Okay.
I had heard that Troutwood is considering SOPEC as well. But nobody can give me a definite as to,
Great.
yeah.
So the power is in which broker has the most electricity that they're
Mhm.
brokering for,
Yeah,
right?
that's.
And then SOPEC has right now locked in at 600.
Mhm,
MVCC has 860 if all 17 join, which
Mhm.
probably all 17 are having similar conversations like we are.
Probably
So we
yes.
have a 25% risk of them dropping like 25% of that 17, and then they fall below SOPEC, where SOPEC already has 600, and it sounds like they might get a whole lot more.
SOPEC is counting us in that 600.
Are they?
no,
No,
that's their
they
current
already
low.
have
Right.
600?
Yeah, they do.
Guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, that's where they are right now without any new members.
Okay,
That's just
so the
existing.
question I have
Mm-hmm.
then for them
Yes.
would be with the other groups that are looking at them, where
What
would
would that
that
look
put
like?
them? Because
Mhm.
then we can compare the possible number of 870 and the possible number of
Right.
whatever SOPEC is.
Right.
I think
Well,
that would
and,
be more
and
realistic.
here's, I mean, my fear is with MVCC is we're the first ones to jump on board
Mhm.
and then nobody else does,
us.
and we're stuck.
Mhm.
I don't know what the benefit is to kind of hop on that just yet, but then at SOPEC, you know,
I would say SOPEC, given that, is a safer, a more conservative.
Well, we've already got a contract with Miami Valley for the city's electric that we buy.
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
I mean, we're already part of the Miami Valley Council because we got into that because as a bunch of cities, we got an aggregated better price for what electricity we buy for streetlights,
Mhm.
parks,
Yeah.
all the electric that we
That's
use.
correct.
do we know a
Correct?
timeline for some of the, I mean, like where other cities are standing within this? I mean, is there a benefit to sit back and wait a little bit to
That
see where
is-
they're at?
That is certainly an option. I mean, if you really, if it's very important for the community and the council to understand fully where everything's going to shake out. I mean, you could wait 6 months and see who everybody who joins. Yeah, but then of course you lose that time on
think the
potential
pensions-
energy savings.
Did I understand you correctly? There's 600 members, right? In SOPEC?
No, they
No.
They have, I
But
don't
you
know
said
that.
we are the fourth largest, we would be on the board.
We
Second,
would be, we would be the second largest jurisdiction, correct? We
So
would be,
How many jurisdictions?
I don't know
They
what,
listed four.
I don't know what the count is.
can
We
see
could
them.
pull up their website.
They
right
get
now and tell you.
600 gigawatt
Yeah.
hours. of
Yeah,
electricity.
600.
There's, it's some of the largest ones, which I put on the slide
Dayton
were,
and-
those were the largest ones I put on there, but there are a number of other smaller villages that are involved. So if you need an exact number, I can get that, but the ones that you listed on the website were somewhere around 15 to 20 different jurisdictions.
Are there any other ones in Ohio?
They are all, they are primarily in southeast Ohio. But Dayton is the closest one to us, but they're all in Ohio, but mostly in the
I mean,
southeast.
are other parts of Ohio, do they have other ones that? they-
Oh, like an equivalent? I don't believe so.
Not if Gallipolis is in this one.
Yeah, that's true.
What's that? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
If Gallipolis is included here, that's pretty.
That's pretty.
Yeah, that's down in, yeah. So that's where they, I don't know specifically about Beaver Creek. I can tell you though that other communities, Kettering and Huber Heights both have aggregation programs. And it looks like they've gone directly with a private aggregator to get those. And that is an option too. With that being said, if we were to do that, we would be going it alone. We'd be a smaller pool. So the bigger that we can get, the more likely we are, just like with the OBC and health insurance. The better rates that we can hopefully pull in.
I mean, MVCC is more attractive
Mhm.
potentially.
Yeah.
I'm just fearful that we might get 5 communities that decide to
Well-
sign on, and that's my biggest fear within that.
How long are we tied to any of either of these aggregators?
That's a good question. I believe with SOPAC, we're agreeing for a 3-year trial period. And however, with MVCC, in reading all the documents, I don't think there was any time period with it.
See,
So, I mean, if you wanted out, you would have to wait out any aggregation contract that we'd signed. And council would just need to pass legislation to get out of that program.
Yeah, because I would think it would be tied to what their agreement is with how much electricity they bought. So if they bought for 3 years or 1 year,
Yes.
we're kind of tied. I mean, I'm not speculating, but I
Yeah.
would assume it'd be something like that. Because the only thing with MVCC these letters is the representation of OML and at the state level.
Mhm.
So that, to me, they could potentially become a stronger company than the other one.
Mhm.
But that would be my
I
own.
think the pinching of the pennies is now, right? It
Mhm.
sucks getting an AES bill in the mail.
Yes.
Mine was high last month. But I think SOPEC, to me, they already have 600 gigawatt hours. There's 21 member communities there. I researched that for you. And there's a potential that everybody who's looking at MVCC is also going to be looking at SOPEC. We could wait by all means. And then if my bill is going to go down, or everybody in the city's bill is going to go down 20% or whatever possible savings we're going to get, that's money that we're going to be losing. Or that our residents and us are going to be paying out to energy companies. And we're all new to this. Almost every municipality that just passed an energy aggregate, well, everyone that just passed one is new. We have to figure this out.
Having these conversations right now.
And we have to
Right.
figure out like, okay, well, we went 2 years with SOPEC. MVCC now has a better rate. Now let's pivot, right?
Mhm.
But I think to get this passed quickly, to get like bills and cheaper bills in hand of all of us, it seems to me that SOPEC would be kind of the most surefire way. When we get a seat on the board. Well, right now we're the second largest, but if anybody else joins, like another one that just passed an
Stay in the top
aggregation,
5, yeah.
but we'd probably still have good sway on that board. Kind of where this boils down to be 100% is like, could we get data on what the residents of Dayton were paying prior to
Mhm.
aggregating
Yeah.
to now, and compare that at their current level of only having 600 gigawatt hours versus if we're going to add a whole bunch of more residents and
Mhm.
customers to that base, they have more leveraging power, which that can, in common sense would say, drop the bill even lower. So we know like if we could get a number of what their current savings is, and then we could pretty well speculate that it's going to go lower than that because there's going to be more people on that plan. That would kind of shore it up for me.
Okay, I can get some information on those rates. And these are, all the rates break down in like fractions of a cent. So just to round off numbers, most people right now are paying around 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Dayton locked in something around 7 cents a kilowatt hour. And they locked that in before all the rates went crazy. So they were very, very fortunate with that.
As did Beaver Creek, as I'm learning now, from Tom's question, not that it matters to us, but they're with a aggregate company called, it's either Dynegy or Dynegy, it's like Energy with the DY.
Yeah.
and they're locked in at 4.5. That's a company out of Houston and it's got about 50 municipalities in Ohio.
Well, and it'd be interesting in the meantime, if any other places go ahead and make a decision to see where some people are jumping on at too, before, if within the next couple weeks,
Mhm.
because everybody's probably having the same conversation right now.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
maybe if someone else, or they might be waiting for the first person to kind of jump
Yeah.
and then go from there. So if we find out any information between now and when we really have to make a decision, it'd be nice to
Okay.
kind of see, because if we find out that 10 jurisdictions decide to jump onto MVCC between now and
Mhm.
2 or 3 weeks from now, that might change kind of that
What-
opinion.
What did you say Dayton's was?
They're somewhere around 7 cents per kilowatt hour.
Around 7 cents?
Yeah.
My feeling is that the MVCC number, the gigawatt hours is like best case scenario. And it would be equal with SOPEC if only 25% of those 17 communities decided not to go with them. And the chances are probably pretty good that they would lose more than 25% in this decision-making process, and that we don't have the numbers for SOPEC. So I'm just, it's scales are really tilted towards SOPEC in my view.
As of now, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, at current rate, if someone's on AES and then Chris is right with the 7 cents on an average household that uses 873 by the state of Ohio from Choose Energy Sources. That's what the average usage is. It's $34.13 savings per household at current levels. Per average household, per monthly. $34 a month, $409 a year.
It can be, if you can lock in a good rate, it can be a
Average.
substantial savings.
Right.
Um,
And that's at their current one without a whole bunch of other municipalities
Mhm.
coming in. So
Larger.
I do have some more information that may help you make a decision. So here for
I like the grant
MVCC,
opportunities with some-
the timeline that they would be looking at for both electric and natural gas would put it at July 31st. At a best case scenario for residents to start having a new effective rate for both. So same first two steps with the public hearing as well as the legislation in February. Do you have some questions?
No, no,
Okay,
no,
I'm
we're sorry.
sorry. I just kept rolling along. So residents would get an opt-out notice sometime in June and they can take the step to get out of the program if they want to. And then effective rates July 31st with a bill in August is what we would be expecting.
So wait, can you go back?
Yeah.
So the operations and governance public hearings, February, 2 public meetings required after publication. So we
Yes.
publish, if we adopt this at the next meeting or just by consensus of all of us?
I just trying to remember all the details. I think probably the best thing to do for the public hearings would to be planned for them into February. Either to hold them during the council meetings or before or after. So we have to publish, from what I'm hearing, go ahead, I see question.
I'm
a
just,
question in your
are the
eyes.
public hearing requirements independent of our public hearing requirements for passing an ordinance?
Mhm,
So this is separate from, if we want to pass an ordinance, we have to have a public hearing anyway,
mhm.
as
Yeah,
as part of that method,
yeah.
or that process, I should say. So these are independent.
Yes,
Okay.
I mean, the city manager and I had a discussion earlier today as to what we could overlap them. We have to have a public hearing for legislation. Can we have the ORC required
Public hearing.
at the same time? I don't know.
Okay.
What that answer, but the ORC, when it called for these public hearings, I think is just purely talking about these plans of operation and government.
I see. I just didn't know if it was baked into the cake, if we were going to pass an ordinance anyway.
There's some-
All right, they
Yeah.
are separate. Good to know.
That
You're right.
you could, you,
Public meeting more of an informational thing on how it's
Yeah.
gonna work, or is it like a hearing where they get to make their opinion, well, sign on or don't sign?
I think the intent of the public hearing is for people to come in and give their opinion about the plan of operation and governance. I
Will
fully,
they be here to explain any questions or concerns?
certainly, I think if we asked SOPEC or Palmer Energy, they would come. And so they could do that. I really imagine though, that most people are gonna come in and want to know the details about how it really works and not care so much about the plan of operation and governance. But that's what the intent is.
Okay, so is this the same timeline? I know it says process and potential timeline for MVCC. So is it different for SOPEC or is it the same?
Yes, so the difference with the SOPEC timeline is that the electric rates could be effective in April or May. Gas still it really isn't possible until potentially August, or
Okay.
I'm sorry, effective July 31st with August bills. With this MVCC timeline, they're both looking at July 31st effective new rates. I mean, when I say both, I mean natural gas and electric effective rates.
And I'm sorry if I missed that slide. Could you go back? Is there the same one for SOPEC? I just want to write that down.
The idea here too really is just, again, if you were going to go forward next month and make a decision tonight and kind of give us some direction on how, all we're trying to do is illustrate that there is a bit of a lag time between these providers. SOPEC is better positioned to move forward in the near term on electric. We'll have to wait for gas. On the other hand, the MVCC process is a process we have less direct control over. We would be dependent on how MVCC and Palmer and OML all come together to negotiate that, with the idea being that they still have some other approvals to go through, it sounds like, at the public utilities. And so you're looking at a bit of a longer timeline there. I expect that, if we're looking at trying to come to a decision in the next, let's say, 3 months, there's probably not much that's going to shift dramatically on these timelines. You just kind of push them all back about 3 months respectively.
So MVCC, we don't necessarily have to do the public hearings in February because you're not going to
No.
have
All
a
we're showing
decision
is-
made and you're not going to have it state process in place till the end of July anyways, correct?
Well, no, you would want to pass the legislation and do the public hearings in February. I think they're cut off for people to get in and be ready for July 31st effective rates is somewhere in March.
Okay,
So we could
Gotcha.
push it back a little bit, but not much.
okay.
Mhm.
What happens if you wait 3 months?
I think you're running the
Then
rest there of
you-
spending.
You certainly have more,
More
you will
money.
have more information to make your decision with. But as Mr. Joseph pointed out, then you may have missed some savings.
I don't know. I just I mean, yes, we might miss a few months of savings, but we might have a better informed decision.
For
And
the
then
long
that.
term.
So, I mean, short term, yes, you might save $30 over 3 months, but if we wait a couple months, we might save $50 a month,
And make up that $30 for the 2 months that we
Yeah.
weren't in.
yeah, it's a tough decision because it could backfire and rates could, you just don't know. It's tough.
Mhm.
It's a tough decision to make.
I mean,
I guess it comes down to, do you feel we have
So-
enough information to make the decision?
Well, and is there,
Right.
is there a sizable potential upside?
right, because my thing is there's 21 member organizations with SOPEC right now, where there's 17 potential member organizations with MVCC. We already know what their gigawatt hour
Mhm.
leverage is right now. We can speculate that possibly 25% of those 17 member organizations that want to go with MVCC possibly are having, have the same conversation with us, switch over to SOPEC. And then we wouldn't have the data regardless of what the rates are gonna be if every member just kind of okay, we're gonna wait. The math for me, maths, that one weighs out.
I think in the interest of kind of getting to just advancing the conversation, and I know I want to be sensitive to our time too. All I would submit is that what we tried to do here is kind of show you a bit of a pro and con. If in council's opinion, if you feel like that some of the advantages I think of SOPAC are that direct control piece, the type of energy piece, the ability to do the grants, some of those things that we definitely would not have under the MVCC or Palmer programs. If those are things that you want in this aggregation program, then you probably have enough decision or, enough in front of you to move on that, or at least give us some direction about maybe we get more information out of SOPEC this evening. Conversely, if I think on the MVCC side, if it's important to wait to see what the rest of the region does first, because again, we're all there is a little bit of who's on first going on, and we're all in this boat together a little bit. And I think different communities are going to kind of look at each other. And on some level, we have the luxury in some respects of being kind of a smaller community. We can see what some of the larger communities around us decide to do, kind of get a sense of where these pools are going before before you as a council decide what direction you want to move in. That would be how I would sort of frame kind of what we were trying to get out for this evening. Whether you want, if there's consensus that some of the attributes of SOPEC are attractive enough where that's really the direction that council wants to go in, then we'll go in that direction. If we would rather kind of wait and see a little bit, I think we have some space to do that as well.
I personally feel that waiting a month to see how things shake out isn't going to hurt anything.
I don't think our residents care whether how it's governed, whether they get grants or not. I think what they care about is, are they paying 7 cents a kilowatt hour or 12 cents a kilowatt hour? And we don't have that information. And if I can't get that information, I'm not going to be able to make a good
But-
decision
but
for
the
my
other-
residents.
The other problem you have is that the economy will drive these prices.
No, and
I
I
We-
get that.
I don't like to say to my residents, hey, I'm getting you 7 cents. Cause
Yeah.
everything changes week to week. And I guess for me, I get that our residents are not concerned with the inner workings of the agencies. I do get that. But the inner workings of the agency also tells you a lot about where the future of that agency is going. And so that's where I kind of, even though they aren't concerned with it, I am concerned, like, does MVCC, because they're part of OML, do they pull more bigger cities in because they're part of the OML?
And
Those are the kind of things
That's-
I'm looking at. the internal.
exactly. That's why I'm saying I need better dollars and cents.
Can you go to the next slide real quick?
And-
Because
and
it's
I'd
so
like to
in
know, 'cause
anticipating
you-
this.
You told us that Kettering and Huber already went with somebody else and already has rates. So what rates were they getting? And maybe we need to.
So and I totally understand where you're coming from as far as the rate conversation goes, but not to echo April too much, but I am sensitive to I wouldn't want to frame this conversation around the total rate. Because the rate that the broker is going to be able to secure is up to the broker and what they're able to negotiate and where energy prices are. I don't want to speak out of turn, but when I first started here, I met with some folks at Dayton. And they actually somebody made a remark to me that while Dayton has a very attractive rate right now, they were for a time, I believe, locked in at a higher rate than what the market was. So I
Not
really,
that long ago.
right. And I feel I wouldn't want to frame the conversation around the total rate, because what residents will pay in the future really is dependent on who the broker is and where the market is. Having said that, one thing that I think informs this conversation is whether or not the brokers are willing to tell us what their surcharge is as a broker. And what, not to speak for Chris, but what Chris was able to find is that we got some of that information from SOPEC. We were not able to get some of that information from MVCC. And I don't know in terms of our talking, whether or not we're likely to see that, because the contract with MVCC or that program, the contract with Palmer is with OML.
That's
Correct.
correct, which is a nonprofit agency. So, they have certain obligations as a nonprofit, but records transparency in contracts is not one of them. So they may not disclose that. That may be something that stays proprietary for Palmer.
But the bottom line is that even if we make some assumptions here, so we know that SOPEC's rate is, 0.002 of a penny per kilowatt hour. And even if we were to add, an option on there for a grant program, and you kind of run these numbers out, what a resident would pay to the broker as a portion of their fee would be about $22 a year. Even if we assumed that the MVCC rates as a broker, their broker fee is half of that. When you're looking at the cost difference between the brokers, you're not looking at very much money each year, which is again, where I come back to cost is certainly a factor. I think that in terms of, but it, as a resident, you know, the difference between $21 and $10 over a 12-month period is you'll feel it a little bit, but it's not as substantial as some other surcharges you may pay to other utilities, which is where I think on some level, some of the decision you have to make is, aside from costs, are there things about the brokers themselves that attract you one way or the other? And that would be another way of kind of framing that decision too.
Isn't SOPEC a nonprofit as well?
It's a regional council of governments.
Yeah, so it's a nonprofit organization, right?
Yeah, they're not for profit. The only distinction is they're subject to public records laws and public meeting laws like we are.
So that's a lot.
They think they're both council governments.
They are, the difference is some of the decision-making processes with the MVCC option occur at the OML and Palmer level where they're not governmental entities.
Yeah, so the annual surcharge really is not any difference, and that's kind of another plus or minus.
It's a
It's like,
negligible difference. Yeah.
well, one is open, the other one is not. Like our residents can see the conversations and who's making what decisions on their energy rates versus them potentially not having that access, which I mean, it's no different than what we have right now, but that's definitely a plus to have a potential of like opening the doors on those negotiations.
So
Again, the maths for me. Yes.
So do you need a direction from us tonight? How do we want, because right now the timelines you gave us, that's with making the decision within February.
Yes. We would either need specific direction on the broker you want or some information, or we need to know what information you need more to make a
Guidance
decision.
on what we're looking for.
Because if we don't, that's gonna we have to do another work session. That is gonna push this
Another
A
month.
month,
another
Yeah.
month.
at a minimum.
And again, we're not under any legislative obligation to kick this out within the next month. It's really a question of timing, the public hearing process, and when the brokers are doing their bidding and negotiating and bargaining, and those periods when rates are being set. That's kind of what governs when we could actually get a program through and when a resident would actually see their bill impacted.
One last thing that I have. So MVCC, are they just purging or like approaching municipalities in the Miami Valley?
Yes, it is just the MVCC membership. Yeah.
And that, I mean, and who is that? Like West Carrollton or?
Yes, West Carrollton, Kettering, Miamisburg, who else is in it?
I'm sure
There's a lot.
Centerville
There's
is.
probably-
What?
Centerville?
Centerville, yes, they're down that way.
17, there's 16 other municipalities, and then SOPEC, they have a large foothold in the southeast of Ohio, almost solely in the southeast of Ohio, but then they also have like Dayton, right?
And
Yeah.
we did-
And that's the other thing is when we said, well, let's look and see what the bigger cities are. Well, Kettering already has a plan. Dayton already has a plan and Huber Heights already has a plan. So
Right.
which bigger cities are we thinking about?
It's us, we're here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking about 16 smaller cities than us, possibly getting them to possibly, and if you go back one slide. Yes, there's a whole like potentially, possibly versus like, there's not a lot of questions on the left-hand side. So SOPEC also thinking further out, we don't know who they're talking to. I mean, they could potentially be talking
Right.
to every 16, 17 members of the MVCC and whoever else in the state of Ohio who passed an energy aggregation plan this year versus like MVCC, if they're just targeting those member cities, then we're locked in at that number and can't grow. Or like if in a year or two, it's not gonna grow. So, I mean. I don't know. It's kind of, I think
You know.
the feeling is where I'm favoring at. I don't have a lot of questions.
Do the rates stay locked for a while, like if you didn't sign up with SOPEC immediately, but 2 or 3 months from now? What happens? You just buy it into the rate they've already.
I think as I understand it, SOPAC would go to, AEP, Ohio and say, we have this group. What can you give us? What can you give us for this group? Now with MVCC, you would have to go out and put out an RFP to the actual suppliers and have them bid on it.
Maybe I'll offer this. I know that this is a lot and it's your first time seeing it in this format too. And again, while timing is a sensitivity here, I think we have some space to kind of to give you some room to digest some of this, ask us some questions, email if you need any other information or if there's any other context, and then we can kind of keep an eye on what other folks are doing. And
Do we have to pick one or the other for both gas and electric, or
You could split it.
you could split. Yeah, you're not required to do the same broker for both services.
okay. And the only reason I'm asking that is neither one of, MVCC has gas already set up, but SOPEC hasn't quite got their stuff together on that. So, and when they were here giving us the original, they didn't have, gas wasn't even on their
Right.
radar.
Mhm. Yep.
So my question, are there, I know what, 7 years ago or whenever we had people in here, there were other brokers out there that they wanted us to aggregate back then for gas, and then there were electric, but there's other places out there that do it. So I think I don't think this is the only option that we have.
Chance
and
with
I'd like to
SOPEC
see
that,
more options than, and I agree, being part of the bigger group, yeah, absolutely. But sometimes you don't necessarily want to buy your meat where you buy your vegetables.
well, and there's a chance with SOPEC, yeah, they have a large pool for electric, but that doesn't necessarily mean that entire pool is going to join for gas.
Right.
They might not have it passed for gas, and it might have it passed for electric. So you don't know if they're going to have that large pool for the gas.
And
as
I'd
well.
also like to see
Just a lot of
what,
unknowns.
what the cost difference is
Yep.
between, whatever, what's their first sustainable or
And the green versus brown.
green
energy.
versus other electric.
You have probably learned more about gas and electric than you ever thought you'd ever know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's not as easy as just being gas and electric.
No,
It's-
and
there's so many
still
layers.
So much that I
Yeah.
didn't know about this is all.
Thank you for
very
your work on that,
complicated.
Chris. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
sure.
Thank you for putting in all the time, for
Yeah.
putting this
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
something we can
Argue about.
digest.
Discuss, discuss. Yeah.
No, it's discussed. It was good.
It's important. It's
Um,
an important decision.
Well, yeah. No, and I think, and I've got, just in listening to the conversation, it's given me a couple ideas too. So we'll knock our heads together and then follow up on it and come back next month with a little bit of an update. And who knows, maybe the market moves in the meantime and we have a lot more intel about what some of the other cities around us are doing too. So Chris, you want to switch gears and go to the streetlight map for the next item?
Yeah.
So the next two items, I think should be a little more straightforward.
Need a Snuggie. I know, I need a Snuggie. I'm freezing.
Yeah, we need to get more gas.
I will.
I think you spent too much time looking in gas and it again.
All right, so what Mr. Laura is distributing is a map.
We already seen it.
Oh, this thing is
Sneak
not
peek.
gonna let me sign
Oh,
in.
sorry.
Um,
It's light.
what Mr. Lors distributed is a map of our lighting districts. I know that I've heard a lot. We had an incident recently up on Beatrice, which as most folks know, is not currently lit by streetlights. Had some inquiries and some interest about what it would take to light Beatrice if the city wanted to pursue adding streetlights along that thoroughfare. So there are kind of two elements to this conversation, and really, I think all I'm looking for tonight is just to feedback on hopefully two quick things. So the first is really that the actual cost of putting the lights in, and these are again ballpark figures that I got from Miss Bartlett earlier this week, but the actual she reached out and the cost of adding some poles, like streetlight poles, alongside that stretch of the thoroughfare is around $13,000. And then the annual operating cost after that, you're looking at maybe 2 to 3 at current rates, right? 2 to 3,000 at current rates ongoing. So in the grand scheme of lighting costs, that's not a major expense. I mean, we've not budgeted for that. I can make room in the budget for that. We have a couple different opportunities or options as far as how to pay for it. We may have some fund balance in the permissive tax that we can use. There's also, if we come in under budget on some of our construction projects this year, we could use ARPA money for it. So there are options as far as getting the lights installed. So the first temperature check tonight is just whether or not that is of interest to council to go ahead and do. The wrinkle is that we have several different lighting districts in the city, and it is likely that depending on where the lighting company wants to put the poles in, those poles may be installed in different districts. The districts have different methodologies for how residents are charged for those lighting costs. So we can go ahead and put the lights in, and I'll maybe turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about how the differences in rates are calculated. But I guess the longer thing that this has uncovered for us is that at some point in the future, it may be worthwhile for us to revisit how the lighting districts themselves are organized, because there is some inconsistency in terms of how they function currently. So Chris, if you can maybe jump in on how the rates are currently.
Absolutely. And
Structured.
I'll try to make this concise. So we currently have 42 lighting districts in the city. Okay. The vast majority of those were inherited from the township, as I understand it. So those 39, each district, you total up the cost of all the lighting, and then you divide it by the number of parcels in that district. And then each parcel is assessed that amount. Okay. That's how 39 of them work. 2 of the districts, this would be Valley View neighborhood and Brantwood. You take the total cost of the lighting then that's each separate neighborhood, and then you divide that by the total street frontage. Okay, however wide the front of your lot is, right? And then it's assessed based on that street frontage. Okay. The last way that we do this is we have a general district, which picks up many of the lights and parcels that are not in their own individual district. So if your parcel is within 200 feet of any of these red dots on the map, then it's in that affected area. And then you total up of each of those eligible parcels, you total up the linear street frontage, and you take the total cost of all the lights involved and divide it by the street frontage of those affected parcels. And then each parcel is assessed that way. So we have 3 different methodologies there. And yeah, depending on where we install them on Beatrice, there's 3 Beatrice streets, west, central, and east, as I refer to them, because they're separate. They're not continuous.
Not all connected.
If they were all going to be on the central portion of Beatrice, it looks like they would all fall within the general district. And so then any streetlight installed, with a buffer of 200 feet around that street light. Where it hits those parcels would be assessed. Based on their street frontage, okay? I know Beatrice, is Beatrice on the east side there has parcels, looks, I don't know what the name of that district is. And there are so many different colors on here, it's difficult to tell what the names of each of them are, but that would be a separate district. And I think the first conversation that I had with the city manager, I thought it was going to be a little bit more complicated than what it turns out to be, but you're still potentially affecting two separate lighting districts there.
So I guess for me is, okay, putting them up there, you know, we end up in one of the three different types of way we billing.
Yeah.
Are we just adding to the problem? I mean, I'm not against lights and Beatrice. I'm fine with that, but do we need to have a larger conversation about fixing this?
That's the question.
That was really the purpose of bringing
Okay.
it to the meeting tonight, is just to say,
I'm not against Beatrice. I would just like this.
yeah, it was more just to bring to your attention that it sounds like there was some consensus among council that the lighting is a priority on Beatrice. We can certainly start the ball rolling on that, but when we started to get down into the weeds about, well, what does this actually look like? And then are there differences between districts and who may get these bills depending on where the lights go? It's like, okay, well, since there's some variability here, we wanted to just let you know that the way where those lights get installed could impact who's paying and how much. And because of those differences, we felt like it was important to let you know that that could happen, and that this, to me, would be a project that we should tee up in the next couple of years to go back through and start to clean some of this up, bring a little bit more consistency to the districts themselves.
Yeah, as long as we're looking at fixing it, I'm
Yeah.
fine.
Well, I don't even understand the rationale of it, where all these districts are.
That's the, oh.
Yeah,
I mean,
a lot of them
It's a
are
township legacy.
It
Correct.
doesn't
Yeah.
even
Those
make
are
sense.
where
correct.
those neighborhoods came to
The council.
and said, we want, and they all split the cost,
Yep.
okay?
Yeah.
What I get out of what you told me is starting with Valley View and Brentwood,
Yes.
we completely changed the way we calculate how it's assessed,
Yes. And
which is probably the more modern and more accurate way and spreads it out over less cost per parcel.
It probably is more fair because you have, you may have people who own multiple parcels, but they might be small parcels. Or people combine parcels and split parcels. And so that really changes what cost an individual resident might pay.
Right.
I think there's a little bit of a difference with ORCs. The township ones were under township section of ORC
Right.
many years ago. But so Brentwood and Valleywood View, we had to follow the current version of ORC.
Right,
So
okay,
the rules are a little bit.
right, and I get that.
So unless there are real objections to moving forward with the installation, we will go ahead and do the groundwork to start working on getting those lights put in place. And then basically just to tee up, just for your awareness, kind of going forward, as we have time, ideally, we'll be able to get to it later this year. We'll stay in touch on that. But this will be, I think, a good project for staff to focus on going forward over the next, 12, 24, 36 months,
To get.
to just clean some of this up.
Clean up the rating.
Yep.
This would be,
While we're talking about Beatrice, you have some neighborhoods that are off of Beatrice that are not lit also. Valencia, specifically Valencia and Golden Meadows.
Mhm.
And I know that
This is my name.
it would, if we're going to put in lighting, we ought to include those two streets if we can, if it doesn't run our cost up too much.
Yeah, and I think some of the other related to that, some of the other things that have come out of this conversation are that I don't know that we have or maybe an opportunity area for us as we're looking at these districts and where lights are is to develop more of a deliberate lighting plan for the community. And then figure out how to realign the districts according to what that lighting plan calls for. I would hesitate to put lights in too many places for the time being, if only because not even all of our thoroughfares are lit. Spinning is a good example of one that is, but we have other thoroughfares that have no lights currently. I think given what's happened out at Beatrice, there's obviously some justification for moving sooner rather than later on that street. And then what we can do is start a much longer, or excuse me, a much more deliberative process about where do we need lights,
Harshman,
right?
Airway.
Thoroughfares,
Grant,
arterials, neighborhoods, and kind of build a plan that addresses all that in one shot and then says, okay, here's the best way to organize
Light
the
up the
districts to accomplish it.
Perfect.
So,
Um,
just like that.
Does this also go into like a design standard for new development and how that's gonna look?
I'm sorry, that the question was, will there be a design standard for the lights?
Like, because I know that's like came up in several like development conversations that we have,
Right.
is with like how they're gonna do the street lighting, like what's it gonna look like? Is that something that if we're having this conversation, talk about like existing infrastructure, have a decision made on new infrastructure that gets built in the city?
Are there design standards in our UDO currently that would guide someone who's putting in
I would
that
have to,
type of?
I would have to
especially public
double
right-of-way
check whether that
infrastructure.
applies to just like a regular, if you will, street light. I know we've
Yeah.
had those conversations for major corridors like Woodman because it's like a premier corridor.
And
those
some of
still
them are
have
state
that.
routes, so they're governed by different sections of
Correct.
Ohio Revised Code.
So
But that's a very good.
that's a good question. I can go ahead and I'll get with Ms. Bartlett on that and we can give you an update next meeting. And I imagine we will try to tee this up within the next month. Bring something to you in February that shows kind of what the plan is for Beatrice and moving forward with pieces of this.
There's a
So-
guy from like the farm on what's that street? Northern Circle. He said something about like gaslight looking something that we had a conversation about when he came to us.
He wanted to put post lights out.
Post lights.
rather than put
Oh,
street
post
lights.
light.
Well, there's
Because that's
neighborhoods,
light pollution.
there's neighborhoods that will self-assess to have those aesthetic improvements.
Right, and that goes to like a HOA or something.
Yeah, there's ways to essentially
Yeah.
establish a special improvement district within a
So
defined geography to
when
do
you
that, but
did
that's.
your-
Some of those in Huntersville, I mean, in
estimate was
Seville.
that putting the electric
wouldn't-
in
they wouldn't like
overhead or underground?
Some,
That's a good question. As far as how they'll run the current to the new lights, I would have to ask Ms. Bartlett.
Yeah.
She kind of gave me the bottom line estimate, but I am not sure if that was for conduit or to run aerial between the lights. So,
Because if we're going to try and make this more modern, more,
I assume bury it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with
And-
you.
And if we're gonna push our stuff on that we did in Springfield.
Sure,
Street, maybe
sure.
we should practice what we preach.
No, that's fair. Let me loop back with her on that and then we'll get something to you in February that has a little more information and show you how we're going to move forward on it. So. The last item, and again, just for the sake of time, is really also just a FYI sort of notification, housekeeping. As many of you or all of you, I'm sure are aware, the city, we currently have a property tax levy for police. That levy expires at the end of this year. There are two opportunities to put that levy, a renewal, to be exceptionally clear. There is no, at least at this time, I would not recommend that we advocate increasing the property tax. We would recommend a simple renewal, no increase in property taxes, but again, entirely dedicated to police public safety, that would just need to be renewed. We could get that on the ballot as early as May. To do that, we would need council to adopt two resolutions. One would come to you at the next meeting that would affirm the valuation that we get from the county. The second would be a resolution actually putting it on the ballot for May. Should the resolution not prevail, we would have another opportunity to go in November and ask the voters again to renew. And at that point, we would be, if it failed again, the challenge then would be that property tax brings in almost half of the police department's annual budget. So I do not have a plan at the moment for how we would or could absorb that loss of revenue, but it would be significant. But again, I think, the main idea here is it really is a request of the voters just to continue as we are and as we have been for the last several years and to maintain that stability in the police department. But I would recommend we try that in May. And then if we need to, we could go back in November.
Are you having conversations with the school board so that we coordinate?
Yeah, and I also understand that the school board has interest in asking for an increased operating levy. And that is likely to go also to the May ballot. And that's kind of the decision that I wanted to put in front of you all. If you would, one of the options is we could not ask in May, but then we would only have one ask in November. So I wouldn't recommend that necessarily, and as uncomfortable as it is in some respects to be on the ballot at the same time. I do think even just as a resident, taking my hat off, for me, the calculus is really, it's really no change as far as our ask. We're just asking to keep going the way we've been going with no increase in
Maintain the
taxes.
millage that we currently collect.
Correct,
would
in the current
support it.
millage that we have.
And we have a history in Riverside that renewals are usually pretty positive.
So that would be what I would recommend. And if there are no significant objections there, I'll bring
So our
that.
timeline would be that this council would consider a resolution to
Renew.
begin that process. and
Correct.
Then the city staff and clerk would go through the county, the county agencies needed to set the ballot language correctly, get the assessments assessments, I don't say cleared, but make the county aware. And then we would be in place to have the 90-day window met before the May election.
Correct. That's the intention.
All right.
And that's all I have for tonight.
Oh, is it? That's it?
That's your update, so.
Well, yeah, we have executive session after.
I'll
at the
move
very end.
to enter into-
No, we have councilman comments first.
Oh, yeah.
No, I don't believe so. Of this one?
No, Pete, can we dissolve council member comments and go into executive session?
Resolve.
Resolve,
Yeah.
whatever, I don't care.
Not doing
It's,
Okay,
doing-
we can skip right ahead. We had a motion to adjourn, so there's a motion on the floor.
All
All right, motion
Motion to go into executive
Yes.
session.
second,
reasons on-
for the reasons stated on the agenda.
Correct.
So we have a motion from Mr. Joseph and a second from Mr. Maxfield to go into executive session for the reasons stated on the agenda. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Joseph,
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield,
yes.
Mr. Denning,
Yes.
Mrs. Franklin,
Yes.
Ms. Fry.
Yes.
Ms. Lomach,
Yes.
Mayor Williams.
Yes, we are in executive at 7:37 PM. Thank you, folks.